From the first spring rains to the soft summer breeze, dancing on the pine forest floor. The autumn colors catch your eyes, here come the crystal winter skies. It's Michigan, Michigan out of doors.
What a beautiful day in the woods.
Someday our children all will see this is their finest legacy, the wonder and the love of Michigan. As the wind comes whispering through the trees, the sweet smell of nature's in the air. From the Great Lakes to the quiet stream, shining like a sportsman's dream, it's the love of Michigan we all share.
All right, hey guys, welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening. It's been a good night so far. Hopefully you all have eaten your fill and you're not taking a nap right now. I figured so nap time might be in order, but we're just so thrilled to have Jimmy Gretzinger here joining us this evening. Thanks for stopping by. Guys, we are being joined by our other three campuses at this time. So hello to my boys over at Knapp Street. That's the campus I'm from. And our East Paris campus as well as our Kentwood campus. So thanks for joining in, guys. We really appreciate you taking time to make this a priority in your schedule. So let's just jump right into the evening with Jimmy. Again, thank you so much for being part of this with us. Thank you for being willing to share your story. But for those guys here who might not know very much about you or haven't seen the show, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about your show?
Yeah, well, glad to be here. And before we even get to talk about the show, who knows who the first host of Michigan Outdoors was? Morton F., that's right. Morton F., Jerry Geppetta, Fred Trost, Bob Garner, those all the guys that kind of came before. And so a little bit about our show, if you're not familiar with it. We are primarily a hunting and fishing show. We stay just here in the great state of Michigan, and unlike a lot of other outdoor shows, most of them do 13 episodes a year. There's very few that do 26 episodes a year. We do 52 episodes a year. So we are constantly on the road from the west end of the UP all the way down to the Detroit River, and we have a ton of fun. And so I think the reason the show has worked for so many years is that it's not about me, it's about the sportsmen and women of the state of Michigan, and we can do 100, if you watch me bluegill fish, you're gonna get bored pretty quick, but we can do 100 different bluegill stories because everybody's got their own story and their own thing and their own spot, and so it's worked for a long time, and a lot of us that were sportsmen here in the state of Michigan grew up watching Michigan Outdoors. And we are on PBS here in the state of Michigan. So.
Yeah, I know. My kids and I love watching it together. We often will do Pancake Saturday and have the laptop going with Michigan Outdoors TV going in the background. So we love it, and we're just so thankful. So if you guys don't know, I mean, 52 stories a year, that's a lot to process. There's a lot of different stories. And I mean, a question I have is, how do you pick a story? I mean, how do you find these things?
Well, in fact, I'll probably get a few stories tonight from people, just conversations, but we try to stay really current, so the stuff that you see actually on tonight's show was stuff that happened last week or the week before, and so we kind of roll with the season. So right now, this time of year, obviously, it's a lot of ice fishing, not in this part of the state, but we have to go north for ice, rabbit hunting, coyote hunting, predator calling. We're gonna do some stories with some fish carving, like decoy carver type guys, and lure makers and that kind of stuff. And so we probably get 60% of our stories from people emailing or calling in saying, hey, would you like to tag along on a whatever it might be? And then sometimes we initiate as well. But there's three of us that are full-time on the show, and we travel kind of all over the state and try to get as much variety as we can on the show.
Yeah, and you guys, you shoot it, you edit it. I mean, you're doing the whole thing, right?
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes it's right down to we never really know what's going to be on each week. In fact, the show that aired last week, we did some splake fishing, which is kind of a weirdo hybrid fish that is in certain lakes in the state, and we went with a guy who'd been on last week's show, and we fished for 6 hours, no splake. But we got some perch, so we made it into a perch fishing show. So that aired Thursday night, and somebody who was watching the show that night, he and his wife, and this guy says, well, hey, you should go fishing with me. I fish that Thumb Lake, and I can catch fish there all the time. So his wife emails me. I think he's in on it. He's not. She emails me and says, my husband's going fishing on Saturday on Thumb Lake again if you're going to be in the area. Well, I'm never really up that way, but I was going to be that weekend. I was speaking last weekend at a 2-night event, so I had all day Saturday to do nothing. So I texted this guy in the middle of the day on Friday, and I said, hey, I hear you're going fishing on Thumb Lake tomorrow. This is Jimmy from Michigan Outdoors. Can I tag along? So he called his wife, "What did you do?" He said. So we get stories that way. So I ended up going out with him on Saturday, and we caught 6 Blake, and that'll be on tonight's show. So it's pretty fluid, and sometimes we know in advance what's going on with opening days and different seasons, but sometimes you just never really know.
Yeah, and I'd imagine probably of just about every guy in this room, maybe every guy watching across all about 1,000 of us, you've probably covered just about as much of the state as anybody in here, at least when it comes to outdoor recreation and the things we get to enjoy here in our state. There's not a lot of places that get to enjoy all the things that we get to do.
We have a ton of variety, so that's what makes it nice. That's how we can do 52 shows a year, because we have such variety all over the state.
And so in those adventures and all those things, I imagine there's a bunch of guys in here who do enjoy the hunting and fishing thing, who do like to go out and catch a big bass or shoot a quail or things like that. But there's probably a number that aren't. If we look at the statistics, it shows that the numbers are declining. But I don't know about you. I think there's all kinds of things to enjoy. What are you most optimistic about for the future of outdoor recreation here in our state?
Well, that is a good question, because we do see a slow decline in the hunting sales licenses, not so much in fishing. But so because of that, everybody kind of has a doom and gloom attitude. But what I have seen because of that, and one thing that I'm excited about, is that so many of the sportsmen's groups around the state, whether that's Turkey Federation or QDMA or, I mean, you name it, there's a ton of them, but they all have really made a concerted effort to really focus on getting kids and new people into the outdoors. So when I grew up, I mean, there might have been a kids fishing tournament, maybe, but now they're every weekend, all the time. There's squirrel hunting tournaments and rabbit hunting tournaments that are geared at getting kids into the outdoors. So we are seeing an uptick in kids and in women. And so we're seeing more of them get in the outdoors. So that's something that I'm pretty optimistic about. And I get to see so many sportsmen giving of their time and their effort and their money to get new people, not just kids, because it can be your 30-year-old buddy or your 60-year-old friend of your dad, whatever it is. We just need to get more people into the outdoors. And I think sportsmen overall are seeing that. So.
Yeah, seeing the sharing,
Yeah.
bringing a guy along with you kind of thing. So we asked you guys and the guys at the other campuses to go ahead and submit some questions for Jimmy, for him to be able to answer. He doesn't really know what's coming here, guys. So we're going to get to some of those questions right now and do some live Q&A with him. So question number 1 comes from Jeff at the Knapp Street campus. Hey, Jeff, how you doing? What does a dream day in Michigan's outdoors look like for you?
Wow. Well, I guess probably my favorite thing to do here in the state of Michigan is to hunt grouse and woodcock. So I would say a perfect day for me would be either in the middle of the UP or in northern Michigan, chasing bird dogs for the day, and then ended up at some local brewery that night to kind of end the day, and then maybe stay at a deer camp, like a bird camp out. That's kind of like a perfect day for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thanks, Jeff, for the question. Next is Jerry from Kentwood. Hey, Kentwood campus. Thanks for joining in with us. Jerry asks, what is your favorite memory enjoying the outdoors as a kid?
Wow. I'm going to be telling some stories tonight, so I'll subtract it from those. So I won't tell those right now, but favorite memory as a kid. Well, I remember my first deer that I ever got, and it was, and I had missed a few, but I remember that first deer. I was a spike-horn buck on state land in Sheboygan County, and I remember that, I remember just when we walked up on that deer, it was like, I can't believe I actually was successful finally. And so that memory really kind of.
Yeah, and for those of you guys who've never been hunting before or don't know what that's like, it's kind of a sacred moment. It's kind of a special deal.
It really is. It is. There's just so much that goes into it, and there's so much, and a lot of it for me is who's with you, the camaraderie of the hunt, and it was just me and my dad, and it's something I'll never forget.
Great. Well, this next question again comes from our Knapp Street campus. John asks, and this is a very timely question, if Michigan continues to fall into the lake, and it doesn't exist anymore, which state would you move to?
Wow. So did the UP fall into?
Would they consider themselves part of Michigan?
If the UP is still standing, I'd probably go there. But
Yeah.
if the whole thing went south, I'd never been there until this year. My daughter was spending some time. She's a missionary in Uganda, and she did some training in Hawaii. And so I went to Hawaii for the first time. I'd probably pick that. And they have a ton of hunting and fishing there on the Big Island, so I've been there all of 5 days, but it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Real estate agents in Hawaii, get ready. This one comes from the East Paris campus, and John asks us, what has been your favorite meal enjoyed from the field, and what is the most unusual animal you've ever eaten?
Favorite would be probably venison backstraps or tenderloins, and then only thing better than that would be elk tenderloins or backstrap. But the weirdest thing, at some of these, now the wild game dinner, the food here tonight was incredible. It's not always the case at some of these wild game dinners. So, most unique. I mean, anytime you're eating like raccoon or possum and that kind of stuff where it's like, and it's got to be like cooked down and then put in barbecue sauce and sit for a week, and then you can make anything tasty. So that's some of the weirdest stuff that I've had. It's not very good. So
let's hope that didn't first be addressed by MDOT or something like that. We don't want to go there.
I did go to one though. There was a squirrel on like a spit kind of a thing, and I thought, wow, somebody really went to a lot of trouble to make this squirrel. And I took a bite. I think what they did, the stick was just like to hold it in place, and they must have just put it in a microwave for 15 minutes. It was horrendous. I still remember that squirrel.
Oh man, I enjoy my wild game, but no, thank you.
I mean, squirrel can be good, but you got to know what you're doing.
Yeah. Paul here from the Cascade campus. Paul asks us, how has God revealed himself to you through his creation? That's a good question.
I heard somebody say one time that they're the best version of themselves when they're in the outdoors. And I had to think about that for a while. And so, for me, I think for a lot of people who love to hunt and fish, I mean, when you're out in the woods and you're spending time in creation kind of by yourself, to me, it's like kind of being in church kind of thing. It's just, you just get to see God's glory and his beauty in a way that a lot of people don't get to see. And so as an outdoorsman, I think that's something we take for granted sometimes, but we probably shouldn't. I think anytime I get to spend some time in the outdoors alone, whether that's hiking or hunting or fishing, it's very powerful.
Awesome. Another one here from Cascade campus. This one comes from Jack, and Jack asks, what are your must-haves, your can't be outdoors without it kind of pack essentials that you take with you either on the trails or hunting and fishing?
Well, it varies so much for time of the year. So this time of the year, I have, a lot of times I have my ice fishing stuff in the truck, so I got to have a really good pair of long underwear. That's a must. Good boots. I always have several different boots in the truck. But I don't have like one pack that I take for everything, so it's very specific. So when I leave, what the cool thing about my job is I get to go on at least one adventure, sometimes 2 adventures per week. And so I, pack pretty specific for whatever it is that we're doing and try to think, what are we going to need? And a lot of times, and just kind of a good rule of thumb is when you're going to go, and especially if you're going to be with people that aren't as avid as you, is like bring backups for everything. So bring a backup gun, backup ammo, backup boots, and that surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, has helped a ton of different times throughout travel in the state because somebody always forgets something. So, but yeah, I don't really have one specific go-to, but it's very, depending on the time of the year, I usually have that stuff all in the truck.
Gotcha. The old military saying, right? 2 is 1, 1 is none. So, yeah, it's a smart advice. This one comes also from Cascade campus. His name's Brad. Brad asks, can you tell us a funny story about Mort Neff?
Well.
Any worth sharing in a church?
I was just going to say. I never got to meet Mort Neff because he was gone before I started with the show. And the only story, I've heard some stories about Mort, and the one that I guess I can probably pass along is that they would show up for a story, and they might be there for 2 or 3 days, and they would enjoy the town and everything that was happening, and then on the last day they would shoot the story and then get out of there. So he enjoyed a lot of what Michigan has to offer, I guess maybe.
Yeah. And so we've got one more from the crowd. This one comes from Gavin here at Cascade, and he asks, what first brought you to the outdoors? What first made you get into getting outdoors?
It really was just tagging along with my dad, actually, and I'm going to tell some stories here in a little bit about some of those early times of hunting and fishing, but we have a little cabin up in northern Michigan in Sheboygan County near the Pigeon River State Forest, and I grew up in Ludington, and so we did most of it somewhere between those 2 spots, but it was really just kind of tagging along with my dad and all the guys at deer camp, and which, this spilled over into turkey camp, which spilled over into trout camp, so for me it was that group of guys. It was that camaraderie that really drew me in. And then once you started having success in the outdoors and the adrenaline rush and the fun and the challenge, depending on what you're chasing. But yeah, it really kind of started with just walking behind my dad.
Yeah, I think that's probably true of most of us who enjoy the outdoors, or really anything, is it's largely influenced by who took us, right? And especially our dads. So hugely important. Well, thanks guys for your questions. Really appreciated them. Those were some good ones to get to. Now, if any of you are outdoorsmen, or if you've experienced your own adventures out there in our state of Michigan, a lot of you might find yourself in a situation where you didn't quite know what to do, or you weren't so sure of yourself, especially early on. Like Jimmy was sharing, just going out to deer camp or trout camp, and all those experiences you had when you first started, just kind of getting your feet under you. Could you share a couple of stories with us about those adventures, about things, or maybe you found yourself in a position where you went, I don't really know what I'm doing here.
Well, that still happens up to today, not knowing what I'm doing, but yeah, that's kind of one of the things I want to talk about tonight as we kind of weave through this is about foundations, a kind of foundation in the outdoors and a foundation in everyday life. But for me, when I think about foundations of hunting and fishing and just getting started, the one story that comes to mind, which took place at this deer camp. I'm going to get up because I need to move around when I'm talking. But it happened it was the very first time that I went archery deer hunting. And so it was up at that cabin in Sheboygan County that I was talking about. And it was pretty cool because I had, like I said, tagged along with my dad for years, but this was the first time that I was going to get to go by myself. And so I remembered it was a Friday. We drove up to our cabin. There was about 6 or 8 guys there at the cabin. And so back then, when I grew up, you had to be 12 years old to hunt with a bow and arrow, and you had to be 14 to hunt with a firearm. And so being 12, I had my little stick and string, and we were going up there. It was October. And back then, you couldn't really go out to the local sporting goods shop and buy a hang-on tree stand or a ladder stand like we have today. They didn't really have those available. You had to go to the hardware store and get 2x4s and plywood, and you would build your tree stand. And back then, you used to be able to put a nail into a tree on state lane. You can't do that anymore. But because it was hard to have a good spot, our one good spot that we had, that's where my dad would sit. And so I went maybe 300 yards away, and we built up a little natural ground blind, so you take sticks and twigs and branches and just kind of pack them around you, get them maybe a couple feet high, and then you lean against the tree. And I had my little bow and arrow. It was the first time out, and I was sitting there for maybe about half hour, 45 minutes, and I hear this deer coming. I can hear coming up, and I'm leaning against a tree, and he comes in to just on the other side of the tree. And I'm like, okay, this has got to be a deer. And then he starts making this noise, which was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Well, to a little 12-year-old boy who's deer hunting, he just made that. I thought, well, this is a deer. It's got to be a buck. It sounds like a buck grunting right behind me. And it's pacing back and forth. And so I'm like, thinking, well, either way he comes around this tree, I'm going to have a good shot. I'm right in the right spot. And I can't believe I'm going to get a deer on my first time out. And I'm already thinking, like, how big is this buck going to be? And where am I going to put it on the wall? And all this is going through my head. But it's making this sound. Well, the problem is that's not the sound that a deer makes. That's the sound that a bear makes. And so finally, because you're 12 years old, like, oh, that's a deer, it's a buck. And then it dawned on me, it was like, no, that's a different sound, Jimmy. And then I was like, that's a bear, and it's pacing on the other side of the tree, right here. And then I realized that we were sitting in a spot that we affectionately called Bear Woods, so I should have probably put 2 and 2 together. But so once I realized it was a bear, I did what any good up-and-coming young hunter would do. I screamed like a girl and ran away. Boom! I took off, jumped over the thing, threw my bow down. I ran to where my dad was sitting, and I climbed up the tree. And he's like, "What's up? What's going on, buddy?" And I'm like, "Oh, there was this huge bear." He came in, and he's like, "Well, did you see the bear?" "Well, no, I never actually saw it, but I know it was right there." And so I'm just sitting there. I can remember my legs just dangling off the platform, and then it dawned on me that we were going to have to go back to camp later that night. So I whispered to my dad, I'm like, "Hey, we don't have to tell the guys about this, do we?" And he's like, "Well, we're not going to lie. We got to tell them what happened." And he goes, "But if you'd go back to your spot, then they wouldn't make as much fun of you, if you went and finished out the hunt." So I'm like, "Oh, all right." So I get down, walk back to this, and I make as much noise as humanly possible, snapping off every twig, but I sat the rest of the night. But yeah, that story was one of my very first times hunting. I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't have much of a foundation in the outdoor world to even know what do you do when a bear is on the other side of the tree? And I'm not totally sure I even today know exactly what to do in that situation, but I remember that one. And another time, kind of something weird happened. It happens a lot in the outdoors, but fast forward now, I was in high school, and we were in turkey hunters in the room here tonight. Any turkey hunters? Oh, I've got a few. So when you turkey hunt, what you a lot of times will do is go out the night before and what's called roosting turkeys. And so you go out where turkeys live or where you've seen them before, and you just kind of sit on the forest floor or lay down, and you're listening for birds to fly up into trees. They roost, they sleep in trees at night. And so what happens when you hear, they make a ton of noise when they fly up into a tree. So it's kind of a good spot for you to be like, okay, there's some turkeys here, and you can hear them for hundreds of yards away if it's not too windy. So that's a good way you kind of scout for birds to start in the morning. And so we were roosting turkeys. Now I'm all by myself, and laying there in the forest floor in the springtime of the year. It's just a beautiful time to be in the woods. And I hear this squirrel that's getting pretty close, and it's getting closer and closer. And I finally am like, man, I should probably move or do something because it's really close. So I kind of get up on my elbow like this, and I look, and about right here was not a squirrel, but a skunk. And so I'm like, what do you do now, So I'm looking at the skunk, and some of the deer hunters in the room, you may have heard this old wives' tale that you should never look a deer right in the eye because they can make eye contact with you and they can see that you're something. And so I'm like, does that apply to skunks? I'm not really sure. So I'm winking at the skunk, trying to keep one eye shut. And he's looking at me and I'm looking at him, and I didn't know what to do. And fortunately, I didn't do the get up and run away. He just looked at me for a long time, and then he just kind of turned and walked down like this. And at one point, the butt of the skunk was right there. And I was like, please don't. And he didn't spray, but I remember that one. That was early on. And but again, I didn't have much of a foundation to know what to do. One more story for you. This one happened to me while I was in Colorado, actually. It was elk hunting, an archery elk hunt. And it was my dad, a buddy of mine, and myself. And it was the last day of an archery hunt. And we saw this group of elk going up over this rise. And so we do what a lot of hunters do. We tried to get around in front of them, head them off the pass. And so we did that. And so I'm kind of sneaking along this little edge. You got to imagine a big, huge, thick, just so thick trees you can't even really see into it. And it was kind of an edge of it right here. And then there was this huge valley off to the right. You could see for miles. And so the elk were in this thicket. And so I'm kind of sneaking along, and out steps a cow elk about 10 steps away. And I'm thinking, oh, this is perfect. I'm right where I'm at, and the herd's going to come out right there. And there was maybe 10 or 12 elk in this group, and out steps a spike bull next to her. Well, where we were hunting, they had to have 4 points on one side to be a legal bull. So they were not legal targets. And so I'm waiting, and it seemed like forever, but it wasn't probably, it was maybe a minute or so, but the wind was bad, and the wind was blowing this way, so they finally smelled me, and they blew. So they kind of and so when they do that, that's kind of a warning to other elk in the area that, hey, get out of here, something's going on. So they spook and run into this valley. And so when they do that, I hear coming behind me, maybe not even as far as that is from me, I hear this coming out, and this elk, a spike bull elk, was coming out of this thicket. And he's coming out, so when I spun around, I didn't have time to dive or jump. I just kind of leaned like this and got the bow out of the way, and he's coming out on a line. I actually had time to think, he might actually rub up against me when he comes out. He's going to be that close. And so he's coming out, and at the last minute, he kind of puts his head down and veers to the left, which is right where I was standing. And I don't think he saw me. I don't think he was trying to do anything to me, but as he went through that last bush, that's right, his forehead came up, and I went forehead to forehead with a spiked bull elk in Colorado. And I was not prepared for that. I didn't have a foundation of skills for that. So when he turned the corner, I bounced off, and it was like someone took a 2x4 and just smacked you right across the forehead, and it swelled right up, and I had a cut here and a cut here, and I just launched through the air, and a buddy of mine saw that my bow broke, and so my buddy runs down, who maybe 40 yards behind me. He comes down, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm, adrenaline and everything. I'm like, I don't know. And I'm kind of feeling around and trying to see if I got stepped on, and I didn't. And so we quick get a glove and get some pressure on the cuts, and they kind of stop bleeding pretty quick. And then he does what most good hunting partners do. He just starts laughing. And he's like, "Dude, you just got run over by an elk," he said. But again, I didn't have much of a skill set to know what to do there. But as you spend more time in the outdoors, you do get more comfortable with different kinds of things. And like I said earlier, one of my favorite things is grouse and woodcock hunting, upland hunting. And then when I think about that now, I've been doing it since I was 12, so it's been 36 years that I've been upland bird hunting. And I was looking the other day just for the boots that I have for that. I've got the 8-inch uninsulated Gore-Tex, I've got the 12-inch uninsulated Gore-Tex, and then like the 12-inch insulated Gore-Tex, I got a 12-inch rubber boot, an 18-inch rubber boot that's uninsulated, then one that is insulated. And that's just boots, but not all the other stuff that goes into it. And I was thinking the other day that when it comes to a foundation of skills, I'm pretty good when it comes to that kind of hunting. I've either experienced it or I know people that have. So when it comes to that kind of hunting, I have a really good foundation. I'm kind of prepared no matter what happens. And so kind of one of the things I want to talk about a little bit tonight is how do we do that in life? How do we have a foundation that will kind of hold no matter what? So there's my stories of just getting started. So
Thanks for sharing those. Those are, I can't imagine. I've had my share of head injuries, and that is, I've not yet done that one. But thanks for sharing that. And as we go on with our evening, something we're big on here at Ada Bible Church and Men's Ministry, and just as a church as a whole, is that we believe that every man has a story. We think that each one of you in this room not only has stories of getting near sprayed by a skunk and getting head-butted by an elk, but we have all kinds of stories, and stories that make up who we are. And we believe that each man's story is important and that it's worth sharing and worth hearing. And one of the things that we love to get to do is get guys in a room together, whether it's around a table over some coffee or whether it's around a bunch of tables with some brisket. We love getting guys together to be able to share stories, to hear what God is doing in their lives, and to really, frankly, to remind ourselves of the truth that God has for us. But as we go through life, there's things that we bump into that we're just not quite sure. How do you dodge a bull? I don't think you ever really can prepare for that. But there are things in life we bump up against where, man, we might find ourselves in a situation where we didn't frankly know what to do. We didn't know who to talk to. And it's not just the things that happen to us in the woods. It's the things that happen in our living rooms. It's the things that happen in the hospital rooms. It's the things that happen at the board meetings. And Jimmy, you've shared a little bit with me in our conversations after getting to know each other a little bit, but I'd just love for you to share a little bit more about what God has been doing over the last few years in your life.
Yeah, he's been doing a lot, actually, and it's funny, I've been thinking about, there's a couple verses that I've been thinking about a lot the last 3 to 4 years, and they're not the touchy-feely good Bible verses that some of us know, but one of the ones that I've been thinking about a lot, it's in the first chapter of the book of James. It says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds." It doesn't say if, it says when. And then in the book of John, it says, "In this world you will have trouble." What are those verses kind of saying? Why am I thinking of it? Because I've been thinking a lot about the storms of life that hit. And in a group this size and people watching their campuses, there is a ton of storms of life that are hitting people right now. You may be just coming into one. You may be right in smack dab in the middle of it. You might be coming out of it. And those storms of life can take different shapes. For some of the younger folks in here, it could be a bad test on a bad grade on a test that you're worried about telling mom and dad about. For others in here, it could be a promotion that you didn't get, a marriage that's failing. It could be a relationship with a coworker that's really stressful, or a family member just got diagnosed with something. But in a group this size and everybody's watching, there's a lot of storms. There's a lot of storms that people are going through. And some of you know a little bit about my story. Some of you don't know me from a hole in the wall. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the storm that kind of hit our family over the last few years. And it started back kind of in the middle to end of 2015. And my wife came to me one day. She said, I just have not felt good in like a month. I just have this abdominal pain that just won't go away, and had a regular doctor's appointment coming up. So obviously we're like, yeah, let's talk to the doctor about it. So they had her go off gluten for 2 or 3 weeks. That didn't really do anything. We went off dairy for 2 or 3 weeks. That didn't really do anything. Now it's been like a month and a half or so, and the pain's getting a little bit more severe. And my wife was the worship leader at our church, and so our church was getting involved in it and starting to pray and what's going on. And we just weren't sure. And everything kind of got fast forwarded. One day she woke up and she was yellow. She was jaundiced, and so we had to quick get her into the hospital. And apparently her liver wasn't working correctly, so they had to go in and put a stent into her liver to open that back up. And when they were in there, they took some samples. And I remember this one doctor, he just kind of said it fairly flippantly, and I don't think he really meant it. He said, this kind of looks like cancer, but we're not really finding anything. And I always thought you just kind of knew whether you had cancer or if you didn't have cancer. I didn't really realize there's a lot of gray area sometime in that. And so we weren't really sure what to think, and now the pain's getting worse. You're starting to lose some weight, and we're like starting to get some scans done, and we were obviously super scared, not sure what to do, and so we opted for some exploratory surgery. So they were going to open her up, get a bunch of samples from all over her abdomen. It was supposed to be a one-day procedure. She ended up being in the hospital for about 2 weeks because it was really intrusive, and so they took a bunch of samples. Now I remember they sent them all to U of M Hospital, and we were traveling down on December the 28th. Right at the end of 2015. And we met with a specialist down there who kind of started big picture and then just kind of walked us through to our diagnosis. And so we had heard the word cancer bounced around, but we didn't have any positive. We didn't really know what was going on yet. And he's very professional, and he kind of narrowed it down. And I remember there was 4 of us sitting in the room. And he looked at us and he said, well, what you have is inoperable pancreatic cancer. And I didn't know much about cancer at the time, but I knew you did not want to mess around with pancreatic cancer. That's a hard one. That's a tough one. And I'm telling you tonight, whatever your foundation in life is, that diagnosis will rock your foundation. So my question for you to start thinking about tonight is, what is your foundation in life? What's the most important thing to you? Think about that for a second. What's the most important thing in your life? Is it your family, your spouse, your kids? Maybe it's your job, maybe it's your investment portfolio, as long as that number's good, 401k. Maybe it's your hobby, that's just who I am, that's what I do, that's the most important thing to me. What is it? And see, all those things I think are foundational things for all of us, really, if we're being honest. But all of those things have one thing in common. They can all be taken away like that. In a phone call, all of those things can change. All of them can change. But there is one thing. There is one foundation that cannot be taken away from you. There's one foundation that will hold through the storms of life, and that is a personal relationship with Jesus. That foundation will hold. Does it make it easy? And no. But it will hold. So we started our journey with cancer. And some of you, especially in a room this size with the people watching, a lot of you have journeyed with cancer, are journeying with cancer. And so as we started out, my wife was getting chemo every 2 weeks. And it'd knock her down for 4 or 5 days, and then she'd come out of it and lead worship at our church. And then she'd get some more chemo, and that'd knock her down for 3 or 4 days, and then she'd come back and lead worship at our church. And it was amazing to see. But I remember so many times in that first month to 3 months, I remember so many times just being like, God, where are you? Are you going to show up or not? I mean, I was mad. Like, are you going to show up? And I remember there was a verse, several verses, but the one verse that meant a ton to me during that time specifically was Philippians 4:13 that says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And I tell you what, I had to say that verse over and over, hundreds and thousands of times, just, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Because when you have to sit next to the person that you love and hold their hand, and they are in excruciating pain, or they're getting sick over and over and over and over again, and there's not a thing you can do about it. I had to say that verse over and just sit there by her bed, hold her. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can sit here and hold her hand through Christ who gives me strength. And I could get through the next 30 seconds, and then I'd say it again. And sometimes when you're in those journeys with cancer, it's a moment by moment, day by day thing. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And that kind of started to bleed into everyday life, because I'm sure all of you are super good husbands and probably do the dishes all the time. For me, maybe 5% of the time, 10% of the time I would do the dishes, but now I was doing all the dishes all the time. And I'm doing all the laundry all the time as my wife was sick. And so I remember that verse came into me, it just kept popping into my head all the time. And I remember one night I was scrubbing a pot. And I'm thinking, this sucks. I don't want to be scrubbing this pot. And my wife has cancer. Cancer sucks. And I'm just, all of a sudden that verse came in and was like, hey, Jimmy, all things. And I was like, oh, you know what? I can do all things. I can scrub this pot through Christ who gives me strength. I can do the laundry through Christ who gives me strength. And it was just permeating my whole world. But still, I was like, God, where are you in this? Where are you? And I would say that every day. And this is what, no lie, every day there was a knock at the door at our house from somebody from our church, somebody with a meal, another check, another meal, another check. Every day there was people. They had a whole schedule of when people were supposed to drop off stuff, but people came over all the time to drop off, you name it. I don't know how many lasagnas we got, but we got a boatload of them. But they were coming every day with this, and I'm still like, God, where are you in this? Where are you? Knock at the door. God, where are you? Knock at the door. And finally, it was like it hit me over the head, and he's like, Jimmy, I have been at your house every day this week. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe an angel to show up and be like, okay, here's how this is all going to go, and here's the dates and the times. And now, can God work like that? Sure. Does he typically? No. He loves to work through his people, through his church. And when the church is being the church the way the church is supposed to be the church, it is a beautiful thing. And so God was showing up every day through his people. So Philippians 4:13 is great. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. But Philippians 4:14, right after that, says, but yet I'm so glad you shared in my struggle. And we are meant to do life in community. And when you go through some hard stuff in life, and if you're not plugged into a community of faith, you're not plugged into a church, and you have to go through that alone, man, it is that much harder. But when you can plug in, whether it's your small group people or your people from your church, that's how God works so many times, is through his people. So those verses, they meant a lot to me. And so we kind of continued on with our journey with cancer. We got to about October of 2016, so we've been fighting it for about 10 months, and the tumor started to grow. And that meant that the chemo had to get more intensive, and it was really hard on her, and hard on the family, hard on our church. It was just a terrible, hard situation, but she was still leading worship almost every week. And October, November, December just flew by that year. It was just a blur. And we got into January of 2017, and we were getting to the point where we were pretty much having to go into the ER, or the cancer center, pretty much every day to get fluids, and we finally had to check her into the hospital. And we were in there for 5 days. And on day 4, which would have been the 18th of January, 3 years ago, the kids had been in the day before. I had 3 kids at the time, 15, 13, and 10. And but on that day, I thought we were going to lose her twice that day. And I remember thinking, we were trying to figure out when you call family, and we had a bunch in, and you just make the best decisions you can with the information you got. But after seeing that day, I was like, I really got to get home and talk to the kids tonight. And so I went home on the 18th and sat my 15-year-old, 13-year-old, and 10-year-old down and said, guys, you know what? God can do anything. But I think Mom's going to lose her battle with cancer. I think we've got days, maybe a week left. I tell you what, that is a hard conversation. What's your foundation in life? Will it hold when the storms of life hit? And so we sat there, and as you imagine, they're crying, I'm crying, and put them to bed that night. And I go to bed, and I get a call at about 1:15 in the morning. And it was my sister-in-law who was there with my wife. And she's like, Jimmy, you got to come right now. It's happening right now. What do you do with that? What do you do with that phone call? Will your foundation hold through that kind of a phone call? And so I get my stuff together and jump in the truck, and the hospital's about 20 minutes from where we live. And I got halfway to the hospital, and my brother-in-law called me, who was also there. And I'll never forget what he said. He just said, Jimmy, she's home. She's home. And I can't even really describe what that moment was like. There was like a sense of relief. There was a sense of what now? I mean, I didn't know what to do. I just knew I had to make some phone calls, and I called our pastor and some friends and family, and get to the hospital, and it's kind of surreal kind of a thing. You have to sign a few papers, and spend a little bit of time with her there, and some family were there. But then I had to go home and wake up my 15-year-old, 13-year-old, and 10-year-old. After just saying to them the night before, we've got days left, to wake them up and say that their mom was gone, that she was with Jesus. That conversation will rock your foundation. Again, my question to you is, what is your foundation? And will it hold? And I learned a lot from our journey with cancer, and I know several of you have journeyed with cancer, but just, a couple of things that stick out to me about that journey that I learned. wasn't just that year. A lot of times our family get together at the beginning of a new year and kind of pick a word that we wanted to kind of see happen for this next year. Kind of, this is what we'd like to see, or this is what we kind of were hoping for this next year, just one word. And so this is right at the beginning of our journey with cancer. And of course, I picked healing. I'm like, I want to see healing. We're going to see unbelievable things happen. And my wife, who was much smarter than me, said, you know what? My word is intention. I had to think about that for a while. I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, I don't know if I have weeks or years left, but I want to live with intention. And I had to kind of work through that a little bit. What does that really mean? What's the real world takeaway from that? And as guys here, the people I can really relate to, but my real world takeaway of how to live with intention kind of spilled over into how I put my kids to bed at night. And if maybe you're like me, and especially when you have young kids age, when it comes to bedtime, if I'm honest, I'm like trying to kind of hurry that process along, like, come on, let's go, let's get our teeth brushed, let's go, pajamas, let's go. And if I'm honest, I'm sure I'm the only one that would ever do this. I just wanted them to be quiet and away from me for a while, and sit on the couch and watch Sports Center. I'm sure I'm the only one that's ever thought that. And, but you know what? Cancer taught me to slow down. Live with intention. Because the point that God was trying to get to me with that was like, Jimmy, you don't know how many more times you're going to get to put those kids to bed. You take your time. Be present in that moment. And my wife and I a lot of times would have coffee when the kids went off to school, and I tell you what, that year that we fought cancer, I did not want those coffee times to end. It's like, no, we can stay a little bit longer. You don't know how many more times you're going to get to have coffee with your spouse. Take your time. And it spilled over into everyday life. I mean, we're all busy. You got jobs. You got a 10 o'clock thing, a 2 o'clock thing, a 3 o'clock phone call, another 4 o'clock thing. You got the kids got a thing at the thing, and you're just, wherever you are, you're thinking down the road. Cancer taught me to just slow down, be present where you are, live with intention. It also taught me, and I think this was the biggest one for me, was to look for the good. Because I just had this wrong idea of life, that if I just was this good Christian guy, maybe I tithe my 10%, I serve the church every now and then, that God's just going to kind of lead me through life, and life's going to be okay. There might be a few bad things that come in, but for the most part, he's going to steer me around all the hard stuff. Now, to a certain degree, that's true. I can look back, and I can tell you where God has moved and directed and guided and everything else, but like we said, those verses at the front end of this talk, they don't say, hey, everything's going to be great. It says, no, you're going to go through some stuff. But God promises to go through it with you and to look for the good. So for me, I had to take that perspective and just flip it over. Because see, we live in a broken, fallen, sinful world. All you got to do is watch the news. This is not how God wanted it to be or how he designed it, but sin entered in and broke this world where 42-year-old moms who are worship leaders can get cancer and die. But God, in his goodness, allows so many good things to come into your life. And if you will start looking for them, it's amazing. Because on some of those chemo-filled days, it was all you could do to just get through the day. And we would have to say, where are we seeing God's goodness? And when we put the kids to bed at night and saying, instead of saying, how was your day? It was like, where did you see God's goodness today? And we had to start looking for God's goodness. And when you start looking for it, it's all over the place, but we take it for granted. You got up today. That's a gift from God. You have a vehicle out there that's probably going to start when you get back out there. That's a gift from God. That's my job. That's a gift from God. All the good things in your life are gifts from God, but we just take it for granted and we don't look for the good, because when we look for the good, it changes how you think. There's some verses in chapter 4 of Philippians, verse 6. It starts with this. It says, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, through prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God, and the peace of God, which transcends understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. What does that say? That's saying if you want to have a peace that makes no sense, and I am living this even today, but even then, and if you want to have peace that makes no sense, pray about everything, but make sure that you are being thankful. Look for the good. When you look for the good and you focus on the good and not all the stuff, but on the good and all the good things that God is doing in your life, it'll change the way you think. So looking for the good, live with intention. And the last one, the thing that cancer taught me, was to praise God through the storm. And there's a story in the Old Testament with some guys with some crazy names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they're going to get thrown into this fiery furnace for praising God. And right before they get thrown in, the king's there, he's going to toss them in, and this is what they said to the king. They said, you know what, our God can save us. Our God will save us. But then they said this, but even if he does not, we'll serve nobody but him. And that part right there was so crucial in our journey with cancer because I know my God can cure cancer. I know he can. I've seen him do it. But even if he doesn't cure our cancer, I'm going to serve nobody but him. That meant so much, even if he doesn't cure our cancer. And when you praise God through the storm, through the hard stuff of life, he meets you in a way that is hard to even describe. But those are the things that I learned, was to look for the good, live with intention, and praise God through the storm. And I'm kind of slow, thick-headed. Maybe some of you can relate. I had to write some of this down and put it on my arm. So I have a tattoo that says, faith, not fear, one of them here. And that was our motto, our family's motto, that a bunch of us got tattooed on us right after my wife passed away. Because that is a daily thing, faith, not fear. So you get to choose how you want to think. And when you're in a storm of life, it is easy to live in fear. What about this? What about this? What about the kids? What about the scan? It is so easy to live in fear. But every day you get to choose. Am I going to live in faith and trust God through this storm, or am I going to live in fear? And that is, I still look at this every day, because that is an everyday decision. That's not, I got this figured out. No, that's an everyday thing. Am I going to live in fear, or am I going to live in faith? And then I have Isaiah 45:3 here, and it says, and I will give you treasures hidden in the darkness, secret riches. I will do this so that you will know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, the one that calls you by name. See, there are secret riches, there are treasures hidden in the darkness that you can only learn about yourself, and that you can only learn about God when you go through some really hard stuff. If you will let God, he will teach you and show you things that are treasures hidden in the darkness that you can only learn about through hard stuff. And I think all of us in this room tonight and watching wherever you're at, I think we could probably lump all of us here into one of three categories tonight. Group one, you're here tonight and you haven't set foot in a church in 10 years. And you're thinking, do they eat like this all the time? Because good grief, that was some good food. Maybe that's you tonight. And you're thinking, Jimmy, what on earth are you talking about? A relationship with Jesus, relationship with God? What does that even mean? How do you start that? How does that impact my everyday life? How does the Bible play into that? How does church play into that? How does that even work? If that's you tonight, if you're asking those questions, and you're like, I don't even know what that really means, but I'm kind of curious about that. If that's you tonight, I would really challenge you to talk with somebody that brought you. If they don't feel comfortable talking with you about it, they can point you to somebody at this church or at one of the campuses that would love to talk with you about how to start a relationship with Jesus, how to start a relationship with God. It is so important. And it's easy to start that, and you can start living it out. That would be my challenge to you. Get those questions answered. What does it mean to start a relationship with God? Maybe that's you tonight, group one. Group two, you're here tonight, and you kind of sort of do the church thing. It's not the foundation of your life. It's just one of the many things in your life. It's just a box to check off. Yep, I gave a little money this week, and I just kind of do. It's just one of the things in my life. Maybe you prayed a prayer at a camp sometime when you were a kid, and you're not really sure what that meant, but you sort of kind of do the church thing. And if that's you tonight, I would really challenge you to to recommit your life and to say, what would be the next thing for you? Would it be to get into a small group? Would it be to start attending church on a more regular basis? Would it be to start serving at church and helping out? Because see, that group two was me for a long time. And there's a verse in Revelations that says, I wish you were either hot or cold, but because you're lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. And that verse scared me so bad because that was me. I was a picture-perfect lukewarm Christian. And maybe that's you tonight. And if it doesn't really mean a whole lot to you, it's just kind of one of the things you do. And if that's you tonight, you are flat missing out. You are missing out on so many things that God wants to do to you and for you and through you to people around you. And you might be here tonight, Jimmy, I got enough. I believe in God. I know that Jesus was his son and all that. But you know who else believes that same thing? Satan believes that. Satan knows that there's a God. He knows that Jesus came and died on a cross for your sins. There's a difference between knowing about it and surrendering your life to it. It's not just enough to know the facts. That's not what it's about. It's about giving your life to him. That's group two. And that's your challenge. What are you going to do with that? Group three, you're in here tonight and you've probably got the biggest challenge of all. You're the committed believer that's here. And you could get up here and do a much better job than me in talking about how God has moved in your life. Here's your challenge. You have people in your life, maybe even sitting at the table with you, that are in group 1 and are in group 2. And what are you doing and what am I doing to gently walk those people into a deeper relationship with God? The beauty with this whole faith journey, it doesn't matter whether you haven't set foot in a church in 10 years or you've been a pastor for 30. God wants to be a bigger part in your life, and you will let him be the thing in your life, not a thing, but the thing. Then you can weather any storm that comes your way. So I don't know where you are on that spectrum tonight, but wherever you are, what would be the next step for you to take? Because all of you have a next step to take. Thanks so much for letting me yap at you tonight, and if I don't get a chance to speak to each one of you, you can always tune in every Thursday night to your PBS station and watch Michigan Out of Doors. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.